Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to Module 1 of Clear Mind, Strong Body. I'm Chris Quinones of Rasayana, the Ayurvedic massage therapy practice in Somerville, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston, Mass. And today I'm going to be going over with you the basics of Ayurveda, the ABCs, so to speak, the language, the history, some philosophy, and the practicality of it, how to apply it to our modern times, and understanding not only the language of Ayurveda, but understanding your uniqueness within that context, your individual constitution, your prakriti, as we say in Ayurveda. And by understanding these foundational rules, laws, and understanding what your true nature is in relation to that, that's going to give you the context for more recommendations as we work further into the program with some of the other modules. Again, I'm Chris Quinones. I'm a licensed massage therapist and Ayurvedic health counselor. I am also an Ayurvedic yoga specialist, trained at the Kripalu Yoga Center in Stockbridge, Mass. So I've been studying Ayurveda personally and professionally now for over a decade, and I thought that this was the best place to start, give you some context and some language. So let's just dive right in. If you haven't already, I suggest that you silence your cell phones, sequester pets, remove distractions, make sure that you've used the restroom and that you have your tools available. So let's start with my slides here. This is a beautiful picture of this building that I went into traveling in South India. It was, oh gosh, I can't even remember where it was at this point, but just one of the many beautiful images that I captured of my experience. I trained both in India and the US, and am an avid person on the courts, and as well as just in terms of my body. I've always been an active person. I've been an athlete, a dancer, a yogi for many, many years now. And the work that I do professionally as a massage therapist and the personal study in my yoga practice is what ultimately led me to Ayurveda, this traditional system of India, which is a medical system encompassing not only mind and body, but also spirit and soul, and really using the laws of nature to provide the remedies of modern life. In fact, that's what the word rasayana means. Sounds translated from Sanskrit. The preface of the word rasa is Sanskrit for many things, but primarily in this context, it's used as fluid or liquid, the juice, if you will, the life-giving juice. It also can be translated from Sanskrit as taste, which we'll get into in later modules with regard to that. Yana or ayana, the suffix of the word, is Sanskrit for path or a means toward, or a system, if you will. So rasayana really means a pathway toward your own vitality and well-being. And those remedies can be either botanical or behavioral. And I think that's one of the many things that I love about Ayurveda, is that it really invites you to get your act together and take responsibility for your life and understand what the difference is between a beneficial and a non-beneficial choice. And by going over the theory today with you, I'm going to give you the basic foundation for deeper study of Ayurveda, should you choose to do so, and have really the tools immediately available to start applying this into your life, and knowing what is unique to you is unique to you, that there's no cookie cutter formula in Ayurveda, that Ayurveda is this beautiful system based off of nature and the elements that make it up. And as a result, it really is a system about relationships and our relationship to our environment around us. And that's unique to each person. So the recommendations that I'm going to be giving today and moving forward will be unique to each of you. And we'll talk about how to get the balance applied pretty quickly. So I talked about what the definition of Rasayana meant, which is the name of my practice here in Somerville, Massachusetts. But Ayurveda is Sanskrit for the wisdom or the science of life. The art of longevity has been another translation. Ayus meaning life itself, and Veda referring to a body of knowledge or wisdom. And so Ayurveda is more than just philosophy and yoga and breathing. It, again, is really about the relationships between you and the environment you're in, as well as what kind of dynamicism nature has, and how we make ourselves vulnerable to it unnecessarily. How we can really harness these energies to our advantage using our intelligence, using that wisdom, and applying it for a real full, rich life. Ayurveda is this traditional medical system of India that's really old. It's over 5,000 years old, based on these medical texts that encompass all aspects of living at that time. This was a time where philosophy, the arts, medicine, and religion were interwoven on a daily basis. And so each of the applications in Ayurveda are richly steeped in tradition. And it's not a system I would describe as a list of do's and don'ts. It's more of a middle of the road approach to living and understanding what kinds of choices in your behavior and your diet and your routine or lack thereof in a day impacts that. And so these texts are the Vedas, the Atharva Veda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, and the Rig Veda, each pertaining to this different section of life. We're talking anywhere between 3,500 to 5,000 BC. And so just to give you a general timeline of Ayurveda and how it is so old and richly rooted into philosophy and nature, we've got the earliest recordings of botanical use for therapeutic applications from the Harappan culture, which was one of the earliest civilizations in northern India, modern-day Pakistan and Afghanistan, were these wandering tribes of people, and they would, through meditation and direct knowledge, these wise elders of these tribes would obtain the direct knowledge that later became these texts in yoga and Ayurveda, this direct knowledge about the nature of the world and the nature of disease and healing itself. And so the timeline for Ayurveda is such that it began with these wandering tribes and then experienced this wonderful heyday, if you will, where Ayurveda flourished, and it produced these other texts, the Ashtanga Hridayam, the Charaka Samhita, the Sushruta Samhita, are other classical textbooks in Ayurveda that go into the medical system more deeply. And it was when the British occupied India that Ayurveda experienced the suppression and really death of its practice for many, many years. Practitioners at the time were seen as witch doctors. This was traditional medicine of the time. And there were even practitioners that had, supposedly their, hands chopped off from practicing marma chikitsa. And so it really was the death of Ayurveda for a long time as British rule occupied India and allopathic medicine really took the main stage. And it wasn't until the 1900s when Swami Vivekananda visited the West and started introducing these ancient philosophies to this new culture. And it wasn't until the mid 50s when India became independent, and then Ayurveda and yoga really started to flourish in its global presence. And yoga arrived here in the West first. And, now that it has become so deeply rooted in our daily lives, it's planted a nice seed, if you will, for Ayurveda, which is another Vedic system that shares the philosophy of yoga, which we're now becoming much more familiar with. In the 90s, the World Health Organization here recognized Ayurvedic medicine as a legitimate medicine, and I founded Rasayana here in Somerville in 2016 after practicing Ayurveda professionally as a massage therapist and personally as a dedicated yoga student with chronic conditions. As I said earlier, I was a competitor in tennis, in gymnastics, and many other things growing up. And I suffered an injury as a competitive martial artist, which is what first led me to yoga and later into this beautiful system of self-healing Ayurveda. And I'll share more of my story as we work through the modules. Right now, I want you to get a sense, now that you've understood where Ayurveda comes from, how we apply it today, because we're not these Vaidyas and yogis that have 8 or 10 hours a day to sit and meditate and contemplate on the nature of life, right? We have families and careers and a country that is really fired up and divided about a lot of things. So to find ways to apply this ancient knowledge to our modern times, I think could not be any more imperative, imminent, necessary for the ease that so many of you are looking for in our daily lives. Like I said earlier, Ayurveda is this comprehensive medical system. It's broken up into 8 specialties, including pediatrics, geriatrics, surgery, internal medicine, and others. It is not just a philosophy. It is not just chanting. In some of the ancient texts I mentioned earlier, the Shishruta Samhita and the Charaka Samhita texts document some of these medical procedures. Even the first rhinoplasty procedure is documented in these texts. So remember that this is a true medical system. Now we are applying it mostly in the sense of our daily lives with mind-body medicine, and how to apply reasonable expectations around our daily lives, and how we manage our attention and energy to enjoy ease and health, and allow the body to heal itself by giving it the proper nourishment and removing the toxins that inhibit it. So these early texts of Ayurveda talk about atomic theory, quantum mechanics, and the now popular subject here, chronobiology. These natural rhythms, these circadian rhythms that our bodies have, and how we've really imposed this kind of social jet lag on our physiologies with our modern schedules as they've become. And in doing so, altered how our genes are expressed and the nature of our well-being and the disease process itself. And the modern application of Ayurveda talks about 3 key pillars in our health and well-being. That is our nourishment and food, the impressions that we take in, the food that we consume to build healthy tissues. It's healthy sleep, that restorative time where the nervous system gets to downshift and take care of the processing of the day, of our experiences, of our substances that we took in, and our energy management, our sexual energy management more specifically, brahmacharya as it's referred to. Really vitalizing, revitalizing, and being judicious about our life force energy. These are the three areas in which we'll apply Ayurveda, which they always have been applied and how they continue to be applied. And also, what I love about Ayurveda is that you can continue to have your own spiritual beliefs and still practice this beautiful system of self healing, which really are human values, not religious values. Although this is a system that is so old, it is richly layered with Buddhism or Hinduism and Hindu mythology. As I said, it's a richly layered system, but it does allow you to have your own spiritual beliefs. So remember that moving forward, that anytime I might be referring to the divine or to God, I personally, Chris Quinones, I'm not referring to this old man in the sky with a long white beard, right? So we'll be talking about having your own spiritual beliefs in some of the live videos on our Facebook forum. But for now, know that this is a medical system. Don't confuse it with a religion. And if you've been told so, you've been misinformed. It's really a guide about principled living and looking around to the elements that make up the natural world around us. And there are 5 of them. And those are reflected here in this slide. We have space and ether, as it's called. Air, which moves within that space. Fire, which is our transformative power in the natural world. Water, which is produced by the condensation that fire produces. And finally, earth. The earth element is the 5th great element in Ayurvedic theory and Samkhya philosophy. And so these elements have specific qualities associated with them, and they combine in different ways to perform these 3 biological humors in Ayurveda. We call them doshas in Ayurvedic medicine. Doshas refer to different processes that are not occurring correctly in the body. Dosha literally translates to fault, or that which is improperly functioning. Because when there's balance with these elements, there is no correction to be had. So let's talk about these 3 principles. The first one is called vata. Vata is the correct enunciation. Vata is the principle of movement, of motion in the body. It is responsible for bestowing the body with enthusiasm, with all activities involving the mind and speech, as well as the initiation and execution of bodily functions, elimination, menstruation, childbirth, these kinds of movement that occur in the body, almost like the body's electrical currents, if you will. And the Vata dosha is made up of the elements of space and air. It has these real light, mobile qualities, much like you would find when you look at air and space itself. I remember when I was studying in Ayurveda school, one of my teachers recommended to study the air and space to go out and fly a kite for the afternoon. And so I did. So I went and I got a kite and I went out there and I watched and struggled as I tried to predict where the direction of the wind was coming from and the force of the wind and what I needed to do in relationship to it to create the lift that I wanted in my kite. It was a really beautiful experience. I would have never thought that that would have been my homework assignment, but there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That's Ayurveda for you in yoga. So that space, that lightness in Ayurvedic medicine, anatomically, you would find in the body where there is a hollow space, right? Within the sinus cavities, in between the joints or the joints themselves, in between the bones, our ear canal, our digestive tract. These are areas of the body that have empty space in which air flows through. Vata is responsible for all gross motor movement and autonomic movement in the body. It's responsible for blinking and sneezing and moving our muscles themselves, moving circulation of blood and lymph in the body. It's responsible for the movement of our thoughts, even in between those nerve cells. And there's a rhythm that you've probably heard me talk about before if you've known me or if you've come to my practice in Somerville. You know, I'm a dancer. I'm actually an amateur ballroom professional dancer. And so I've always loved dancing and music. I've played instruments growing up, and I've always been able to feel or tap into these rhythms, these cycles in the music, the cycles of the notes of where I'm supposed to be, whether I'm playing my violin or I'm dancing the mambo. I need to be able to listen and hear this rhythm. And Ayurveda is no different. The rhythm where Vata is most dominant is during 3 different times. It's dominant between the hours of 2 and 6, both in the morning and late in the afternoon. If you think about this time of day in your personal life, you think about, I know sometimes I'm an early riser as a yogi and Ayurvedic practitioner. I'm typically up by 4:30, between 4:15 and 4:30. But that time of day, that lightness, that coolness is subtle but noticeable. That's why so many contemplative practices have their routines in the early morning, where there's this natural, light, cool, ethereal quality that air has, that space has. It's an expansive energy and quality where possibilities are limitless. This is ether. And then air is the movement, the vitiation, the idea coming to fruition. So early morning, and then again, cycles back to late afternoons where there's this natural light energy that is pretty typical. Late adulthood is the stage of life that Ayurvedic medicine would consider Vata, or the wisdom years. You know, this is post menopause for women and the retiring age, where you see the body physically start to lighten, right? Anatomically, bones dry out, tissues start drying out, as well as the skin dries out a bit more as we age, right? And also, when I think about the later stages of life where we have often people will then start to perhaps inquire a little bit more deeply in their own spiritual journey if they haven't already. It's kind of that um, natural, lighter energy that has you less connected with the gross physical world and more connected with the ethers and the heavens. And seasonally, the rhythm of Vata here in New England, anyhow, is late autumn and during the winter time. This is the time of year where we have much more of that light, dry quality of air and space. It's a time where skin is typically more dry. It is when we might tend to feel a little more disorganized with forgetfulness or nervousness. A lot of cracking joints are also signs of imbalance, in that we have a lot of that air and space element. And so here are some other qualities associated. I've talked about Vata being cold and light and dry. It's also rough and erratic, a bit unpredictable, right? Like I could fly my kite that afternoon, or at least to some degree, because the wind was strong enough, but it wasn't the gale force hurricane that blasted through my folks' home in the Florida Keys this year. So it's unpredictable, right? It's mobile. It can change in an instant. It can change direction. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, that is what allows us to be enthusiastic with new ideas and to express that enthusiasm and be able to articulate it from the mind through speech to actually take action. So I talked a little bit about what an imbalance in Vata looks like, with the cracking joints and some forgetfulness and feelings of anxiety or fear. But there are others. And a healthy Vata expression looks like this, where you have that balanced movement in the body of circulation. You have a consistent elimination with daily bowel movements that feel complete, and you have that lightness of the mind. You have that flexibility to change directions when plans change. That is a quality of a balanced Vata dosha. And here again are some of the other symptoms of an imbalanced Vata. There are others. Pain, for example, is a big one. Pain is a telltale sign of Vata imbalance. So is dry, cracked skin and constipation, dandruff, are some others, as are the wasting away conditions like osteoporosis. That would be considered a Vata condition according to Ayurveda. So that's the Vata dosha. Remember that, Vata dosha. The second of the three principles in Ayurvedic medicine is the Pitta dosha, Pitta. Pitta is, as I said earlier, the principle of transformation. This is the combination of fire and water, because where there's fire, there also needs to be water to contain that fire. And so Pitta is responsible for metabolic processes in the body, primarily our digestion of our food into strong, healthy tissues. It's responsible for the transformation of our experiences of the day, the mind literally cooking those experiences into knowledge, hopefully into wisdom. And the pitta is also responsible for regulating body temperature as well. And the physiological examples or anatomical sites where you would see pitta in Ayurvedic medicine is in a lot of the digestive juices or bile, the acids that are created to break down the food. That is basically the energy of pitta dosha. It's the energy of fire. It's this breaking down, this catabolic energy to get to the fuel source, right? To get to our building blocks for healthy tissue, for a clear mind, for a strong immune system, for reduced allergies. All these things are responsible for good health. And without a strong fire to bring that transformation, we won't experience it. And like Vata dosha, Pitta has dominant times in a 24-hour cycle, within the year seasonally, and in our stage of life. Pitta is most dominant between the hours of 10 and 2. You know this when you think about it, right? Like I tend to do my best work between the hours of 10 and 2. That's when I'm cooking, midday, right? And in the evening, if I'm still up after 10 o'clock, even if I felt tired earlier in the evening, if I'm still up at 10, I kind of get this second wind. And that feeling, that second wind, is the subtle energy of Pitta dosha kicking in after 10 p.m. and starting the fire. We'll talk more about the repercussions of that in later modules. But for now, just know the cycles of Pitta dosha and when it is naturally more dominant in the environment. Middle age, from puberty to the golden years. This is literally the transformation of our bodies from a child into an adult. It's the time where we're cooking and producing in our careers, building families, building our homes, building the householding, if you will. And then here again in New England, the summer season is the Pitta season of the year. Now, other parts of the world may not have just summer and winter. You know, India has dry and monsoon season as well. So that plays into effect with the elements. Remember, Pitta is made of not only fire, but also water. And so that is taken under consideration in these cycles, so that when you move forward in life with your decision making, as I'm going to share with you, you're going to understand, well, what's the rhythm? What's the flow of the universe right now? What's the flow of nature? What kind of energies are flowing at this very moment, at this point in my life, at this time of year? And that will help inform your decision as to whether you're going to add more energy to that rhythm or you're going to balance it out by introducing an opposite quality that's presenting. And the qualities of Pitta are much like the qualities of fire itself. It is a very sharp and hot and light quality. And by light, I mean luminous. That light of fire literally brings luminosity to the mind. We want this. We want to be able to cook our experiences into wisdom and knowledge. We want to be able to cook our food into that rasa, that nourishing liquid to build healthy, strong tissue. And it's sharp and penetrating. Fire penetrates a log and turns it into ash. Fire mobilizes, it spreads like a wildfire. And it breaks things down into the basic components so that it can transform it into nourishment. We need this. But when Pitta becomes too excessive, when we have a lifestyle of overscheduling, of eating a lot of hot foods like cayenne pepper or chili peppers, or having a diet with a lot of oily or fried foods. This in Ayurvedic medicine would be considered a pitta agitating lifestyle, that you are in fact adding more of that hot, oily, sharp quality from your environment into your internal environment in the mind, body, and soul. And as a result, you can burn the house down. When Pitta becomes imbalanced, well, let's talk about when Pitta is healthy first, shall we? Yeah. Like I said earlier, the luminosity of fire is what allows for some strong comprehension, right? The luminosity of the mind, as well as the skin. These are, people who may generally have either a slight pink hue to their skin or red hair, or also that kind of natural tan, that olive skin tone that always seemed a little like someone came back from holiday. And Pitta, when balanced, that fire in our gut, that fire allows for a good, strong, steady appetite and metabolism. We're able to see clearly and have steady hormone regulation as well. When we have too much of a lifestyle with that excess heat, with that overscheduling, we have an imbalance, and it tends to show up in the form of inflammation in the body. Typically, heat in the blood is looking for an escape route, quite frankly. And it will often come through the skin as a means to try to cool the body. The body's natural intelligence is trying to cool itself from all of this heat. And this is when conditions like eczema and rashes or hives come out. Rosacea and acne are another indication of a pitta imbalance. Inflammation in the joints, all your itises, your arthritis, your bursitis. These are inflammations that are occurring from a pitta imbalance, according to Ayurvedic medicine, as well as that acid reflux and indigestion, which is so common when we have a pitta diet of oily foods, of very spicy foods. Yeah. Also, I will say that an imbalance of pitta is not only represented in these physical symptoms, but also in our behavior and in our mindset, which I'm going to talk about more in a moment. But with pitta, with all this heat, right? All this heat is rising, and it's rising often to the head instead of staying in this heart-centric space that we want to stay in. And as a result, that can manifest as hot-headed, short-tempered, sharp-tongued, impatient, excessively critical. These are symptoms, signs. So if you are finding that you're experiencing these, then Ayurvedic medicine would say you have a pitta imbalance, that we got to do something to cool your body and to stop the spread of it, all this heat. Otherwise, heat dries up the tissues, right? A fire dries the air. So want to make sure to have that in check. So to balance, you would add opposite qualities. If you're having symptoms of rosacea or hives or a sharp temper, you're going to want to introduce cooling properties. You're going to want to slow things down from the typical overscheduling that is common for pitta imbalances and body types, and that will cool the fire down. We'll talk more about that specifically in later modules with daily routines and rituals, but for now, these are the basics. Understand that pitta is fire and water. It breaks things down and cooks things for you. And the third mind-body principle of Ayurveda is the kapha dosha. Kapha, not kapha, but kapha in Sanskrit. And kapha is the principle of structure, of cohesion. It's made up of earth and water elements. And with that, it brings this sticky, clinging like quality to it. So it produces stability and strong, healthy tissues. It lubricates the tissues. It lubricates the joints. In the body, Ayurvedic medicine, kapha would be literally the muscles and bones that make us up, as well as our killer T cells and our macrophages and the aspects of our immune system, because kapha protects, it lubricates, it nourishes. Yeah. Those with kapha dominance or body type, they tend to be a little bit more curvy in their body. They literally have more stick into their bones, literally. And with that comes this wonderful, stable, sweet-like quality. Kapha dominant individuals tend to be the rocks in their communities. They're the people that people go to for emotional support. They're not moody. They're always loving and kind and very stable people. And this is a very strong quality of the kapha dosha. And that's what it looks like. When we have excess kapha, according to Ayurveda. When we have excess earth and water elements, we get weighed down. We have this heavy, clingy, slimy quality to it. And that usually represents as depression or heaviness, sadness, along with more of a vulnerability to sinus and lung congestion, as well as weight gain and water retention. There's all this excess earth and building. We talked earlier about pitta being catabolic and breaking down energy. Well, kapha is anabolic and it builds, nourishing and support. So when we have a lifestyle where we don't have enough lightness in our diet, if we're eating a diet that's, a lot more meat or dairy, for example, we're eating a lot of rich food late in the evening, this would create heaviness. It would create excess earth element, literally, as well as not having a lot of movement. Some of the other qualities of kapha, other than being sticky, slimy, and heavy, is that it's also very cold. It's also very static. It's very slow. It's manda. It doesn't move very quickly. It's pretty stagnant, in fact. That's what gives it its stability. But when we have a lifestyle where we've been too stagnant, we are not moving the body physically enough, or we're not challenging it enough in our workouts, or we're working out at the wrong time of day and we're introducing a different energy than what our tissues really need. These affect kapha, produce that instability. So when you're feeling heavy, or like you're experiencing a lot of mucus production and sinus congestion, you would introduce opposite qualities to balance that out. You would stick to more of your clear foods and clear broths. You would stick to heat, right? We typically want to go into a sauna or a steam room when we have a cold. And that is to help warm up the kapha dosha, which is very cold and cool, much like mud itself when you mix water and earth. So there are times where we need to balance kapha by lightening the load and warming things up and making things more stimulating to break through that stagnation. And then there are times where we need to introduce more kapha-like qualities of heaviness and such if we're feeling too light in the vata category. So you can see how these three mind-body principles work together. Now, everybody has all three, and we have them in all different levels. They're actually in the classics up to 7 different Ayurvedic body types. No one is just one of these 3 doshas. We're all 3 in different amounts. And the balance that we're talking about is not the balance of equal parts of all 3. That is not balance according to Ayurvedic medicine. What is balance is understanding your constitution, which you would work through and discover by working with an experienced practitioner, having a brief exam, having your pulse taken, as well as answering a lot of questions about your habits and your schedule around your daily life. The workbook that you have will give you just a brief taste or flavor to point you in terms of your tendencies and what your constitution might be. So you can look to that questionnaire. But the balance that Ayurvedic medicine is referring to is what the doshas are doing right now at any one given point in time, and how that compares to your constitution, your dominant doshas. I am a pitta kapha dominant person. I'm dominant in 2 doshas, equally so, or almost equally so. Pitta is just slightly more dominant than kapha. But, I've talked to many practitioners. Some say my kapha is stronger than my pitta. So who knows for sure, but I know that those are the 2 dominant ones for me. And so in the summer season, I have to be particularly careful about not overheating my body and mind. So I use care in how I dress myself with certain fabrics, being natural and loose fitting. I use my air conditioning judiciously. I modify my diet to eat more cooling foods, which we'll get into in the digest and detox module. I make care not to overschedule myself. These are ways I balance my pitta dominance. And I know that when I start to feel short tempered and hot, then I've gotten out of balance. That's the balance that we're talking about. The balance is in relation to you as a unique individual and the environment you find yourself in. So don't look to what someone else is doing in terms of their routines, because it may not be appropriate for you and it may not be appropriate for the stage of life which you're in. In fact, the definition of health is right here in the Sushruta Samhita, another one of the classic texts I mentioned earlier. Sama dosha, sama agnisha, sama dhatu mala kriyaha, prasanat manindriya, manasvasta ityavidyate. This is what is really proper health. It's that you have strong tissues. You're going to the bathroom every day and eliminating those waste products. You have a clear mind. Your sense organs are strong and functioning properly so that you can perceive the world around you more clearly and be able to find the truest expression of yourself by nourishing yourself appropriately, by resting appropriately, by giving your body the judicious management of sexual energy appropriately. This is the definition of health. And if you look at the definition of health by the World Health Organization, you'll find that they're not too far off from each other in terms of what constitutes a healthy body, right? We know it's not just the body itself, but the state of mind, heart, and soul. Speaking of the mind, the mind is really something that is at the heart of Ayurvedic medicine, because our consciousness, I believe, is always being eavesdropped on by the body's cells. That our thoughts are not ours alone, and when we aren't able to give ourselves the nourishment both in our diet and our environment, it leads to this instability of the mind. Now, in Samkhya philosophy, which is the home philosophy of both yoga and Ayurveda, it talks about the mind called the buddhi, or the part of the mind called the buddhi. The buddhi really refers to the mind's ability to discern, to be able to recognize between a beneficial and a non-beneficial choice. And it's when we are not able to process our experiences in our lives, and we're not able to digest our food or eliminate waste properly, these uncooked, undigested experiences produce residues. And these residues cling to our tissues physiologically and to our consciousness. And as a result, they don't give us the clear state of mind about the world around us. And that causes a lot of anxiety and mental illness, according to Ayurvedic medicine. And much like the three mind-body principles, the doshas, vata, pitta, kapha, Ayurvedic psychology says there are three main states of the mind: sattva, rajas, and tamas. And sattva is the desired state, right? Sattva refers to the harmonious mind, the contented mind, the mind that the practices of yoga and Ayurveda, the medical system, yoga, the spiritual system, working to provide that space of realization and actualization. And rajas represents the agitated mind, the stimulated mind, the excited mind. Again, this can be positive or negative. In Ayurveda, it's always about when and who and what kind of energies are being present, what qualities are represented right now, and what do we need to balance them out with. Rajas is the excited mind. Tamas is the dull mind. It's kind of associated with darkness, but that's not a bad thing. Tamas is the mind that is the container. It holds the space for rajas to execute the ideas that sattva comes up with. Like I said, sattva is the desired state that we're aiming for here, right? It gives us that ease, that state of mind where we're not living in a world of worry, but instead we are on the path to our own healing. You know, people with a sattvic temperament are typically those that have a largely vegetarian diet. Their daily practices are very altruistic. They're pure. They're calm. You know, a sattvic mind is steady and contented, irrespective of what's happening around it. That's the steady mind. And, you know, in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, Yogas Chitta Vriddhi Nirodha is the first Yoga Sutra that talks about yoga being the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. That's a sattvic state of mind. And don't confuse it with being in a state of bliss and being, you know, so blissed out you're not aware of what's happening around you. Sattva is a clear mind, but it's a steady mind. So while understanding that negative things occur, you can distinguish it between yourself and that around you. And there are things you can do to build that sattva muscle in the mind. Remember, sattva is, according to yoga and Ayurveda, who you really are. When you think about young kids and how loving and trusting they are and how open they are, and that they're closer to sattva, right? That because they've just come into the world, and that this is the true nature as spiritual beings that we are, and it's a result of distortions in our world that create the suffering. Yeah. And so to cultivate more sattva, you don't necessarily have to fly to India and do a 6-month, yoga program or, go far. Really, you can create a sense of sattva in your daily life. In fact, that's what Ayurveda is all about, making those daily choices, evolving your daily habits in a way they're going to be sustainable, consistent, and effective. And for creating that ease, a lot of meditation practices are available. I personally am not a meditator. I've tried, I've done some guided meditations, I've had some apps on my phones, and while I find them enjoyable, I don't find it my cup of tea. I personally prefer pranayama, which I'll be guiding you through in some later modules. But like I said, a lot of contemplative practices occur early in the morning between those hours of 2 and 6, that vata time of day that is so light and so ethereal. Yeah. Spending time with nature and again, eating a mostly vegetarian diet, keeping that light, clear, subtle quality to not cloud the mind. And of course, when we're talking about systems of nature, we can't help but talk about how we source our food and how dramatically that has changed here in the United States anyhow, in not being clear on the labeling of our foods and the sourcing of the food. And so I'll talk more about that in our digest and detox module. But for now, generally, you want to make sure you understand the food you're eating has been well prepared, well grown, and by well, I mean organic. I mean ideally locally sourced. I mean without a bunch of packaging that's going to be left behind and hurt the earth and the planet. That's what I'm talking about when I say well diet and well sourced food. And then, of course, enjoying good company, doing volunteer work, offering, giving, that joyful serving quality is sattva boosting. They say if you having a bad day, go help someone who's having a worse day off than you, and you'll feel better, right? And obviously, or maybe not so obviously, scheduling times of silence regularly is a practice that boosts that sattva state of mind. In the system of Ashtanga Yoga, there's a practice called pratyahara. Pratyahara is an intentional withdrawing of sensory stimulation for a period of time. And that means silence. You're not checking your email or jumping on Facebook. You're not watching your favorite show on Netflix. You're not chatting unnecessarily. In fact, you're not talking at all. You're resting the vocal cords, the organ of action. You're allowing the nervous system to actually digest without force feeding it more sensory information in or out. So these are simple things you can do right now. Take a 15-minute walk around your block every morning. That's going to energize you a lot more than a cup of coffee. Although I'm not going to take away your cups of coffee, so don't worry about that. And, really start to think about being willing to change your habits and go beyond what you naturally like and do well, and be willing to cultivate a strong discipline to bring these kinds of daily practices into your life. Now, you don't have to do all of these things every single day and adhere to this rigid list of things to do or not do. That's not the flow of Ayurveda, right? Ayurveda is middle of the road. Find what works for you, but just start. And here are some ways you can do that. And this will help mitigate feelings of fear and anxiety and depression that are so rampant right now. Like I said earlier, Rajas is the excited mind. It is representing kinetic energy. It imparts values of change, right? So sattva is the state of mind that comes up with the idea. It's joyous, it's clear, it's light, it's not bound by the limits, right? It's ether and air, it's light, it's space. Rajas says, Rajas gets excited. This is actually how we're going to do it. That's Rajas state of mind. Now, Rajas is pretty common in our modern world right now, just given our lifestyles and the sheer pace at which we live it. It's led to quite a bit of disturbances in the mind. And here are some healthy ways to manage excess rajas. Again, taking some silence, right? I talked about cultivating sattva by scheduling periods of silence. That balances out rajas. When we're constantly talking and constantly moving, constantly doing, we're not being. And so there is a cost to that if it's left unchecked. And by having a lifestyle where you do a lot of moving, where you do a lot of talking, you may be a bit more susceptible to having this agitated state of mind. And you're stressed out, right? And our food impacts our minds as much as they impact our bodies. And I'll talk more on the detox and digest module, but there are foods that are more stimulating to the mind, and those are sugar and tobacco and coffee, as well as some sharp spices in our food as well. Usually people with a rajasic state of mind are some of them more self-indulgent, always looking for the next thing to feed them, right? It's like this, uh, and I don't want to frame it negatively. Again, it's just this energy of uh, overconsumption, overstimulation. And as a result, people can't fall asleep or stay asleep. People are working themselves literally to death. And we're having this workaholic syndrome. So too much rajas is no bueno, people. All right. This is definitely not the state of mind the yogis and the Vaidyas in Ayurveda want you to be in. This is the diseased state to be in. However, there are times that we need more rajas energy. For example, if you're feeling really depressed or stagnant in the mind body, you would introduce the opposite quality of stagnation and dullness, either in your diet by using some more spicy foods like black pepper or cayenne pepper or ginger, or you might choose to spice up your yoga asana practice or your workouts to another level because you're just feeling a bit heavy and dull. These are ways that you would intelligently cultivate rajas to bring balance. So again, I talked about rajas being this, over indulgent, overstimulated state of mind, and that's true. But that's when it's imbalanced in one direction. When it's imbalanced in the opposite direction, we need to bring more rajas energy in. And when it's imbalanced in the opposite direction, it's called tamas. Tamas is that enduring, stagnant, heavy force. Tamas, tamas, tamas is also really abundant given the use of recreational drug use. But I will say that tamas has its own benefits. But when it becomes excessive, it becomes difficult to start new projects. It becomes hard to get motivated, and generally represents as these feelings of being stuck emotionally as well. When we sleep too much, or we eat food that is not fresh and organic or well sourced, we have a lot of stale foods, a lot of leftover foods. This would be considered tamasic. It creates more dullness in the mind body. We want to energize a tamasic mind by introducing more rajas, but not too much, right? Just enough. So you're dancing between rajas and tamas in this natural ebb and flow to create the contented mind that's able to discern whether you need to energize something or rest and restore. So that is the basics, people. That gives you a sense of the language, of the elements, of the doshas, and how they interact with one another when they are going to be more abundant and perhaps more of a risk for you in terms of your vulnerabilities with dis-ease, and where they can be your buddies and advantages, really, to your choices. That's really what this is about. This is about learning how to recognize what your tendencies are, what your dominant qualities are, so that when those cycles occur of that dosha being dominant, okay, I have a lot of momentum already riding with these qualities. Let me make some good choices here around my schedule and my diet and my company to make sure I don't catapult that out to another stratosphere, right? Without any control, without any clarity, because that's what we're really aiming for here. So go through your workbook, answer the questionnaires to give you a little hint as to what your dominant dosha or doshas may be. Like I said, there are up to 7 different combinations of these doshas that are considered your your constitution, and know that by knowing that, you'll get a sense of where your trouble spots may be moving forward and where your strengths lie as well. With that, I wish you a wonderful afternoon, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.